Sunday, Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review of the new Kurt Vile record, B'lieve I'm Goin Down. Kurt Vile is a Philadelphia singer-songwriter, and he's been at it for well over 10 years now as far as releasing music under his own name goes. He sort of grabbed a lot of blog buzz in the late 2000s with his kind of lo-fi mix of folk rock and psychedelic rock and Americana. Music fans and music writers alike were enamored with his sound, especially when he came through with his breakout record, Smoke Ring for My Halo, on MATADOR Records. I didn't really care for it personally, but even I was impressed with his follow-up, Waken on a Pretty Daze, a record that to me featured slightly better lyrics, some prettier, more psychedelic layers of instrumentation, and this is definitely Kurt's most ambitious LP yet, with some of his longest songs landing on here. He still had this kind of lazy, rambling demeanor to his vocal delivery, but these songs definitely felt more lively, they felt more engaging, and I was excited to go into this new LP over here, hoping that he would continue on this streak of creating intoxicating but also slightly electrifying folk rock music. And one thing that had me even more excited going into this album is that some of the songs leading up to this thing were really dry, not as soaked in reverb and various layers of instrumentation, just kind of drowning Kurt out a little bit. Kurt felt really up front and center vocally, and I thought it was going to be exciting to hear Kurt kind of play it less trippy on a record. And that's exactly what he does on this new album over here. The instrumentation on this record is loaded with pianos and keys and some acoustic guitars. There's a little banjo on one track, of course, drums, vocals, and there are just some very light touches here and there of echo and reverb. It's nowhere near as dreamy as his past two records. But Kurt still plays it pretty low-key on his vocals, even though he doesn't really give himself anywhere to hide in the mix with a bunch of reverb and layered guitars. He's still very hey dude. Even on the opening track here, Pretty Pimpin', which is easily one of the most upbeat tracks on this entire record. It's this surreal, introspective song about Kurt not seeing who he is or not realizing that he is him when he looks in the mirror and he thinks the guy in the mirror is some kind of stupid clown. And I like the song I'm an Outlaw Too, which I'm not sure if the drums in the background here are live drums or if they're loop drums. There's just something about the percussion here that feels slightly electronic, which is cool because that's sort of an aspect I liked about Kurt's last album, this fusion of these very repetitive, hypnotic, somewhat synthetic beats along with this very psychedelic folk instrumentation. So again, I like these songs. They're two of the most upbeat tracks here, but once the energy level on this thing drops on this record, and it doesn't even need to drop that low, because even these two tracks are pretty low-key and very easygoing, when Kurt gets even more subtle, he just kind of loses me. I guess the issue with not only dropping the energy level lower, but also putting Kurt at the forefront of these songs is that he's not exactly like the most riveting guy on the planet. I would call some of these more toned down tracks on this new record over here meditative or even contemplative, but the thing is, Kurt doesn't even really give us anything to contemplate or chew over with what he's saying. A lot of the lyrics on this record just feel kind of empty to me or aimless. Really the only thing he seems to be kind of engaging with over and over is sort of what he sees as maybe a bit of pointlessness in this thing we call life. And Kurt's reaction to that is to kind of create a distraction and become a certified badass and pop a few pills to kind of take the edge off, as Kurt sings about people who just kind of fake their way through life. And that's life though, sad to say. However, that line is an example of maybe just one moment in a song where a lyric pops out and actually makes a pretty poignant statement in the midst of 5 or 6 minutes of just very low-key poetic rambling. To me, songs like Wheelhouse on this record are so breezy, they're so casual, that musically, lyrically, just really in no way whatsoever does the music make an impression on me. Sort of like on the song All in a Daze, work as well, which if you just look at the title, you can obviously the vibe that Kurt is going for on this record. Just a lot of the lyrics on this album don't really amount to anything, in my opinion, but there are at least a handful of moments where Kurt's lyrics are very telling in kind of a personal way, sort of like on the song Lost My Head there, which even though the instrumentation is very easygoing, and I don't really mind a lot of the easygoing instrumentation if it was just topped with some better vocals and some better lyrics, the instrumentation here actually is very pretty, it's very pleasant a lot of the time on this record, but I digress. Despite the instrumentation on this track being so easygoing, we have a song here about, like, mental health or a mental breakdown of some kind. Kurt channeling his inner Daniel Johnston a little bit on this track. And the lyrics here are kind of dark, they're poetic, they're intriguing. And on the track Kidding Around, Kurt goes into his, I guess, songwriting process, his lyric writing process a little bit, talking about how maybe some listeners assume that there's some kind of deeper or greater meaning behind a lot of what he's saying, when in fact he is just kidding around. However, this track, while I like it, and I think it's a very telling moment on this album, and it's Kurt actually saying something significant about himself, I personally am not working under the assumption that there's anything deep going on a lot of these tracks. I think that is in fact the problem. Kurt is singing about kidding around as if he's reminding his listeners that he is, because they don't know and they haven't figured it out. It's very obvious to me on a lot of these tracks, and a lot of the songs on his previous records too, that he's just fooling around, and that to me is kind of what is a turnoff occasionally. Not that I think Kurt needs to be super serious, but a lot of what he is sort of musing about on his record sort of feels like it's only entertaining to him. It's a decent record though, it's just not as exciting or as intoxicating as Kurt's last album, I don't think. And again, I don't necessarily feel as if Kurt putting himself at the forefront of these songs and really giving himself that singer-songwriter throne on this record and just doing away with a lot of the extra effects and the extra instrumentation, it didn't have to be the underwhelming move that it kind of is on this record. If his vocal delivery was just a little bit more, I don't know, impassioned, or if his lyrics were a little bit more interesting and less aimless, this album could have been a little bit more entertaining. But as of right now, in my opinion, I think it's decent. It's okay. I'm feeling a decent strong 6 on this thing. Transition. Have you given this record a listen? If you have, what did you think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? What do you think I should review next? And that's it. Anthony Fantano, Kurt Vile, forever.